Welcome to Fed by Fire, y'all. Tonight, we're tapping into 4 different cases. One about insurance fraud, one with mail fraud, and one about a trafficker, and then another about a neighbor feud that just got a little bit explosive. So let's get into the first one. Dawn breaks over a misty rolling hills in a place called Barron County, Kentucky. And the first golden light spills across endless rows of burly tobacco plants, the kind of shit you pass on the interstate. They're broad leaves and there's heavy dew on the ground. They're swaying like a green sea under a pale sky. There's red barns, white fences, all that kind of stuff in the distance. And I'm painting a picture here for y'all. So, there's lines going through emerald pastures, and the air hangs thick with that rich, earthly scent of soil that's just curing those leaves, and that smell that's woven into the soul of rural Kentucky. Farming here is no gentle pursuit. It's a brutal gamble against merciless weather, ferocious pests, and fickle markets. And one hailstorm, one drought, all that shit can shatter a family's legacy. It can do it overnight. And that's why the federal crop insurance program exists. And they say it's a vital lifeline funded by taxpayers, designed to shield honest growers from the ruin that's deep in the shadow of those that are towering tobacco barns that were harvested and leaves are hanging upside down. It's dim, it's fragrant, the rafters, it's old, it's musty, and sunlight's just barely piercing in the cracks. But a sinister scheme was unfolding. So close your eyes and picture a burly tobacco crop up close, tall stalks topped with that sticky leaves, glistening in the summer heat, about ready to harvest. Now meet a man named Larry Walden, a 69-year-old farmer from Cave City. He was a sun-weathered skin, calloused hand, the very image of a lifelong Kentucky grower. Standing tall in his fields from 2014 to 2023, Walden insured his crops just like any responsible farmer or business owner. But behind the facade, he allegedly masterminded in a devastating fraud where he harvested bountiful crops, then hid them, teaming up with another man named Thomas Kirkpatrick, another 67-year-old manager of a place called Farmers Tobacco Warehouse in Boyle County. Walden created the illusion of a disaster. He'd write the checks to the warehouse, kind of a kickback scheme, pretending to buy tobacco that was actually really his own, circulating it back as purchased stock. And Kirkpatrick handed over the fake receipts and the forged documents. That all kind of painted a picture of catastrophic losses, and those phony papers, the canceled checks, and the bogus invoices landed in the hands of none other than the insurance adjusters who slashed the old man Walden's reported yields, and the result was massive indemnity payouts, fraudulently inflated, flowing straight into Walden's account. So that he paid off debts, he snapped up new equipment, and expanded his whole operation with the money he got. But they claimed it was all stolen money. And the web spread wide as fuck through Greensburg Tobacco Market in Kentucky, another place called Fair Deal Tobacco in North Carolina. Walden even sold his tobacco under his neighbors' and relatives' names. So think about that for a minute, just to bury the excess production. So imagine the warehouses themselves, vast echoing spaces, piled high with golden bales of tobacco the air is thick with that pungent aroma of cured leaves. You got auctioneers chanting the rapid fire rhythm. They're going fast, buyers circled around. These are supposed to be temples of an honest trade. But instead, they became a stage for deception. Over nearly a decade, Walden's scheme allegedly siphoned almost $10 million, $9,960.81 to be exact, from insurers meant to protect real farmers in crisis. So, the truth finally emerged after a relentless multi-year probe in the FBI, the USDA, and the Office of the Inspector General, the IRS, all this criminal investigators and more in a federal courtroom in Lexington. Inside that imposing historic courthouse, justice finally caught up with them. The U.S. District Judge, Miss Karen Caldwell, she sentenced Larry Walden to 52 months in prison, and he will serve at least 85% of that, followed by 3 years of supervised release, and he'll be ordered to pay every cent of that $9,960.81 in restitution. And he wasn't alone on the docket. The conspiracy ensnared a network of trusted locals, like we talked about the other man, Thomas Kirkpatrick. He got 48 months in prison with 2 years of supervised release and over $16 million in restitution. Another man named David Hunt he was 63 from Campbellsville. He faked organic tobacco claims. He got 42 months and 3 years supervised release with $5.4 million to pay back in restitution. Another man named Terry Wilson from Edmonton, he got time served with 3 years of supervised release in order to pay back $667,000 in restitution. His son Christopher Wilson, 50, got 18 months and 3 years of supervised release in order to pay back $600,000. Another man named David Wisdom of Glasgow got 48 months with 3 years of supervised release, ordered to pay nearly $2 million in restitution. Another man named Robert Burge got 3 years and 6 months in order to pay over $1.1 million in restitution. And another man named Harlan Ray Highfield from Brooksville, he got 42 months and 3 years of supervised release, ordered to pay $1 million in restitution. So, in the quiet heart of Kentucky, this thing all unfolded, where integrity is supposed to run deep as the root in the soil. But as the government puts it, these men betrayed it. They were neighbors turning a system, the very system that was supposed to safeguard their way of life. As the first assistant U.S. attorney, Paul McCaffrey, declared that these defendants fleeced programs intended to protect agricultural producers. And that they did. They got off with the bag, but they had to pay it all back. An FBI special agent in charge, Miss Olivia Olson, warned that there's no place in our society for opportunists who defraud the public programs at the expense of honest, hard-working American farmers. And the USDA Inspector General, Mr. Miles Davis, affirmed that the commitment to root out fraud and to preserve these vital programs, this case stands as a stark reminder that even in America's heartland, greed can corrupt, but when it does, the long arm of justice reaches deep into those rolling hills for the vast majority of the farmers who toil honorably under the Kentucky sun. The safety net holds strong, guarded fiercely against those who would tear it apart. 2. Next, we're exploring the chilling case of hatred boiling over in a quiet Chicago neighborhood. So, let's go to Chicago, y'all. One that escalated from a complaint It was about loud music to a literal firebomb attack where Molotov cocktails were thrown. This story is about a woman named Ana M. Hernandez, a 70-year-old woman who turned her, resentment into a federal hate crime. So, grab your headphones, turn down the lights, and let's get into this one. It's March 16, 2024 in Logan Square, Chicago, a vibrant, diverse neighborhood on the city's northwest side, specifically on the 3400 block of West Armitage Avenue. It's around 11:05 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Most people are doing normal shit, going about their day, going about their weekend, grabbing coffee, walking the dog, all that type of stuff. But in one multi-unit building, tensions had been simmering for months, and they're about to explode. So, the residents on the first floor are a family of recent, Venezuelan migrants. They've been living there for a while, just trying to build a new life after fleeing the chaos back home in their country. And like tens of thousands of other, Venezuelans who arrived in Chicago starting in 2022, they were seeking stability amid political turmoil and economic collapse happening in Venezuela. But their upstairs neighbor, Miss Ana M. Hernandez, a 70-year-old woman who's, lived in the building for years, court records show that she'd been clashing with these tenants, complaining repeatedly to the police about loud music blasting from their apartment. But that seems small, but there were other incidents too where their tires were slashed, they can't claim, even though it's unclear if she was fully responsible for that. And, even a warning to the landlord that those Venezuelan people are going to burn your building. And earlier that month, somebody unidentified had already thrown 2 Molotov cocktails onto their back porch. So, that couldn't have been that lady, right? But the tenants extinguished the fire themselves, but they installed a security camera, and Hernandez later denied her involvement in that earlier attack. But on this day, the camera would capture everything that happened next. So, we're going to see how this lady gets caught up, because it couldn't have been her, when there's already been 2 Molotov cocktails flamed, but the surveillance video showed her this time approaching the fence line that was separating her property from theirs, and in her hand a glass bottle filled with oil, stuffed with a washcloth wick, and it was of course a homemade Molotov cocktail, the same one that had been thrown on their property previously. She lights it, throws it onto the back of the wooden deck, and, it shatters, igniting a fire that spreads quickly across the dry wood. Flames lick up the porch, black smoke bellowing. Miraculously, the tenants spot it in time to put it out once again, and no one is actually injured, but the message is clear that this was no accident. Later that same day, Hernandez escalates further when she slips a handwritten note in Spanish onto the landlord's car, and translated, it was vicious. It said, "Damn Venezuelans, screw your mothers. We do not want you in the neighborhood, so go back to your country. You dogs, sons of whores, you can go the easy way or the hard way. Viva Mexico, you F-words." The note ended with a chilling choice: leave peacefully or face worse. So, think about that for a minute, you guys. Like, she pretty much got this case together for them. The victims, though, they were terrified, and they reviewed the security footage and immediately called Chicago PD. The investigators came, they immediately connected the dots, and it quickly all came together that it was a firebomb. The note, the prior complaints. Hernandez was arrested in April 2024. In her plea agreement, Hernandez admits it all, that she targeted them because they were Venezuelan, that she wanted to scare them into leaving not just the neighborhood or the apartment, but our country. So, this wasn't just arson, it was a federal hate crime they suspected. Unlawfully inferring with housing rights based on national origin. She pretty much gave them that case, though. But, fast forward to December 2024, in the U.S. District Court, Judge Lindsay C. Jenkins, she sentences to Ana M. Hernandez to 2 years and 9 months in federal prison. So, prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois, along with the FBI and the Chicago PD, hailed it as a justice in a case that highlighted rising tensions amid a migrant influx. Hernandez admitted that she didn't intend to kill anyone, but the fear she inflicted, that was intentional, and this case unfolded against a bigger backdrop. Chicago is a sanctuary city that welcomed over 47,000 migrants, mostly Venezuelan, since 2022, and many were bused from Texas as a political statement. It strained their resources, and it sparked a lot of debates. And yes, it fueled resentment in some cases. In some communities, it made complaints about noise and cultural clashes, and misinformation online all played a role in the narrative here, in the stories like this. But the hate like Hernandez, it crosses a little bit of a line into terrorism, especially in the justice system. One flame, not meant to hurt anybody supposedly, but it probably messed with their sense of safety, if anything. So I hope that those people got a new neighbor. My heart goes out to them. But tell me in the comments, what drives someone to do this kind of thing? Was it built up frustration, exploding into bigotry, or deeper prejudice fed by broader immigrant rhetoric? Tell me in the comments. But next, tonight we're going bi-coastal, and we're talking about a man who was going between Washington, D.C. and California, and how he helped move enough of that Fetty Wap to wipe out entire neighborhoods and communities, and did it in a way a lot of traffickers do now. Quiet, boring, in the mail, in FedEx packages. That seems to be the way these days. And, this is the story of 32-year-old Albert Anthony Rios. How a package with a fake name, Martes Benito, started to unravel a pipeline of Fetty, the blues from LA to DC. And let's talk about what it really means for the people on the other end of those substances. So let's get into it. On December 13, 2022, workers at a FedEx facility in Monterey Park, California, they noticed something off about 2 packages that were headed to Congress Street Southeast in Washington, D.C. They were addressed to someone who they looked up and didn't exist, named Martes Benito, and it looked suspicious enough that FedEx decided to flag it, and they called in the DEA. agents opened up one package and found about 700 G's of blues and 200 G's of blow. And 4 days later, on December 17th, they intercepted a second box and discovered another full key of Fetty, more blues inside. So let's pause and think about that for a minute. That's just what was caught, those two random boxes. Think about how many made it through before anybody got suspicious, So this is how a lot of modern trafficking is happening these days, though. It's not flashy cars, it's not corner shit, it's packages. Just fake names and shipping labels. That's all it takes in regular flights between LA and DC. And that was his operation, simple as that. Once those packages were seized, investigators started building a bigger picture that through airline subpoenas, they saw his travel records along with surveillance footage and shipping records. They were able to connect the dots. They identified two people who kept flying from the DC area to the Los Angeles area, and then a few days later shipping the packages back from FedEx in the UPS locations in Monterey Park. Doing that same over and over again. Every time that these boxes were recovered, they were loaded with, them blues, baby. So search warrants at the homes of these individuals turned up even more product, narcotics, firearms, the whole shebang. Large amounts of cash. They were all signs that this wasn't no small side hustle, but this was a pipeline. This was a serious distribution. From the outside, these guys probably looked like they were doing pretty good. Maybe even like normal citizens, who knows? Constant travel, stacks of money, firearms that they need for quote-unquote protection. But from the inside, they're probably feeling a lot of paranoia, always checking their phone, and, wondering if that knock at the door is a friend or a federal agent, or when one day will be their last. And that's the same headspace a lot of us live in when we're in active addiction and living in that lifestyle. Even if we're not moving keys, even if we're just doing little shit, it all stacks up. We're moving our whole lives around the next high. While the DC side of the case was being worked, the DEA in California was running a totally separate investigation. In July 2023, agents there arranged an undercover purchase of some Fetty and some blow, and from a man named Albert Anthony Rios. And when they hit his residence, they found even more product. This is the DC residence. They hit his California residence too. They found another kilo of Fetty and around 15,000 blues and 20,000 in cash. And 15,000 pills is no user amount. That's a little supply chain. Later, when the FBI agents went through his phones, he had photos of large amounts of blues, and he was they said they kind of looked like trophy shots, show off to other dealers of inventory or to potential buyers. They also linked Rio's phone number to those same people who had been mailing the narcotics in DC over and over and over again. So they got him there, and they got him in California too. That's how these cases come together. So now a suspicious box, airline data, all of this was used against him. Phone records, piece by piece. They built a web that you didn't even realize that you were stuck in until it's too fucking late. But on February 7th, 2024, agents executed another search warrant, this time at Rio's residence in California. The other one was the DC residence. This time they recovered about 1,000 more of the blues and an ounce of blow. So just throw that onto his case too. After digging through even more of his phones, they found even more evidence that calculated that Rio was responsible for at least 8,425 keys of Fetty, 1,028 keys of blow. That's a lot of product. And the Justice Department likes to say that 1 key of Fetty is a whole lot of lethal doses. If it's pure, it can contain hundreds of thousands of potentially lethal doses, and that's just what it is. So, when you hear about 8.5 keys, you're not just hearing about some small potatoes. You're hearing weight that could potentially wipe out whole communities, spread out across different neighborhoods all around the area. And maybe get into the hands of your coworker, your cousin. But that's the risk the users and the dealers take. Rios eventually pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to distribute more than 400 G's of Fetty and blow. At 32 years old, he was sentenced to, in the U.S. District Court in D.C., to 135 months in federal prison, which, if you think about it, is not bad. That's just over 11 years for everything he was doing. But it's followed by 5 years of supervised release, and the case was pulled together work from all the Alphabet Boys, the DEA, the FBI, the Washington Division, the FBI Washington Field Office, the Virginia State Police, the Montgomery County Police, the Orange County Sheriff's Office, and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. I always see their name pop up in these cases. And when that many agencies are in the room, your world is going to shrink a little fast. So, let's talk about that mindset for a minute. To most people, it seems insane to risk a decade of your life, just for some drug money. But when you're deep in it, you're going all the way. Whether you're using or dealing or both, your brain, it tends to rewire itself. And around a few powerful lies where you think, I'm smarter than them, and you tell yourself, that law enforcement is just too slow, too dumb, too far away to ever catch you, but they will, that it's just business. You avoid thinking about overdoses or funerals. You frame it as supply and demand, which I've been there, that you don't have any real options. Maybe you grew up in that chaos just like I did, in the poverty and the trauma. And, this feels like the only lane where you can win. And, when I was using, it wasn't just the substance that hooked me. It was the identity. It was the late nights. It was the phone always buzzing. I loved that feeling. Like I mattered because people needed me. But really it was just people needed what I had. But people like Rios are not movie villains. They're human beings who walked a series of small steps into a big disaster. But, those steps still leave bodies behind, and he was held accountable for that. So, this case didn't happen in a vacuum. Washington, D.C. has been battling their opioid crisis for a long time, just like cities all across this country. And, every box that made it from Monterey Park to Congress Street, SC, who knows how many did, that it was feeding the fire, flooding the neighborhoods in the areas with those counterfeit pills. But that's what our country is addicted to. And, but agents in another case, have warned that the fake M30s we're always hearing about, that they're a major driver in overdose deaths. They have been for years now. And, my cousin even died because, one wrong pill because she thought it was a real M30. So when you hear about 8,425 keys of Fetty, understand what that really represents. Parents getting calls in the middle of the night. It's a serious matter. And, kids finding their mom or dad in the bathroom. It's a painful sight. I've seen it 1,000 times. Like, it's awful, and I pray for everybody out there. But Albert Anthony Rios, he will spend the most of his 30s in federal prison answering for, this, for the choices he made. And, the poison he was helped moving from California to DC. His story is a warning, not just about the justice system, but about what happens when addiction, greed, and denial all ruin your whole life. If you're struggling right now, reach out to someone today. Reach out to me. Reach out to a friend, a hotline. Go to a meeting. If you're dealing in shit, ask yourself, is the money really worth the time in prison? The years you could lose away from your family? And the lives that could potentially end with your product. Next, let's go somewhere else. Let's talk about a laptop, a hacker in a hoodie in a basement, somewhere halfway across the world. But the case we're talking about next is one a little different. This one didn't start with the code. This started with some stolen mail and some fake passports, and a crew from New York who thought that flying into Mississippi made them invisible. And we'll go to see it didn't. So, we're going to be breaking down how 4 men and a stack of false identities and one alert at a bank that a bank employee turned into a fraud operation that indicted all these 4 men. So let's set the scene. Let's go to Jackson, Mississippi. Not Wall Street, not Miami, not Los Angeles, but Jackson, Mississippi. That choice wasn't accidental whatsoever. When fraud crews move around the country, they try to go where attention doesn't live, where people haven't been doing this. They go where nobody that think is looking, and that's exactly what this crew believed. So, 4 men, all residents of New York State. Their names were, I'm probably gonna butcher these guys, Javion Davin Taylor, Jaden Winfield, Dennis James Swint, and Nicholas Beltry. So, they had no local ties to Jackson, no long-term presence, just a mission to get in, get fast money, and get out. So, let's talk about what the scheme was. This wasn't sloppy. This was no small time thing. This was organized fraud. The plan was simple. In theory, they used stolen identities of real people to create passports and credit cards. Then they walked directly into banks to pull the money out, and they attempted fraudulent withdrawals as if, they were the rightful account holders. And we've seen this kind of case over and over again. No mass, no rush, just confidence. And that's all it takes for a lot of these cases, because confidence sells legitimacy. And we've seen cases like this a lot of times. Let's talk about where the identities came from. So, here's where this case takes a little darker turn. These identities, they didn't go and find people on a data breach. They didn't come from malware. They went to the simplest way. They came from stolen mail. And that's not smart at all. Just another criminal group operating in Madison County, Mississippi. Like we would talk about, they've been stealing mail, which is not smart. You know, they've been stealing bank statements, personal documents, information people assume is safe once it leaves their hands. But that group already pled guilty to state charges. But let's talk about this crew for a minute. They were the next link in the chain. You know, one group steals the information, then another group monetizes it. You know, this is how these little crime networks work. Quiet, layered, disconnected on purpose. So let's talk about the fake passports next. Now, this is the moment where everything escalates because it all came together. Because once you introduce the fake passports, this stops being just some small-time local crime and becomes a federal offense. Passports are federal documents that involve, security, social security numbers and all that. And the moment that you make a fake passport and those entered the case, multiple federal agencies had stepped in. So, of course, the United States Postal Inspection did, and the United States Department of Diplomatic Security, I've never heard of them, and of course the FBI's. So, that's not backup, that's a takeover. A lot of people underestimate this part, but you really shouldn't. The fake IDs might get you past the door and you might get away with this for the short time. The fake passports might get you, they're going to get you federal time though, for sure. Let's talk about the mistake that got them caught. So, here's what really ended this operation. It was no advanced surveillance, no facial recognition, not some secret algorithm. It was just a bank employee noticed something wasn't right. Something was just a little off. It was irregular withdrawals. The behavior didn't match the identity being presented. Just something didn't feel right. And instead of ignoring it, they made that call. The Madison County Police Department, they responded as they should, and inside a rental vehicle, they arrested Taylor Winfield and Swint. There was no chase, no chaos, just the moment the game ended for them. So, they had a good little run. Let's talk about the fourth man. Alright, but one man wasn't in custody yet. He wasn't there. His name was Nicholas Beltry. He thought that distance bought him some time. So, he was arrested later in New York on a federal warrant issued out of Mississippi where they were, doing all this. And that's the thing about federal cases. But they didn't even talk about the loss in this case or in the press release. But the time doesn't matter. And, you're going to be waiting. You got to have a strong case to fight this one. I hope they had money for lawyers. But let's talk about the sentencing and what they got. So, the hammer eventually fell. Davon Taylor, he got 70 months in federal prison. Jaden Winfield, he got 57 months. Nicholas Beltry, he got 54 months. Dennis James Swint got 79 months. So think about all that for some stolen mail. That's 4.5, nearly 7 years for, fraud. But, you know, they had multiple victims, and it was an interstate conspiracy, aggravated identity theft enhancements, and, you know, counterfeit federal documents. So they weren't playing games. This wasn't treated lightly either, because it honestly isn't light, you know. We'll talk about why this case matters now. Alright, this case shows something people, you know, don't want to believe all the time, that fraud isn't a soft crime, that in some cases it destroys people's lives quietly, that victims don't wake up to sirens. It's a little thing, you know. They wake up to frozen accounts, to ruined credit potentially, and years of cleanup. So, the consequences, were they worth it for them? They come fast though. One stolen envelope, one fake passport, one alert from a bank employee, and now 4 men are spending years inside federal custody. And, you know, tonight we talked about 4 different cases, but the same exact message, y'all. Be good or be good at it. This is Fed by Fire. We don't glorify the game, we show the cost. Thank you guys for watching. Be safe.